Hi! In this video you will learn a simple yet effective process and system to get your strategy process right. It is a guide for leadership teams. Getting the strategy right, getting this strategic clarity is one of the 9 core competencies leadership teams need to master on their journey to scale. It's really about getting the strategy out of the heads of the leader or the leaders and into something that everyone in the organization understands and can follow. It is one of the most important components of the whole system, because without strategic clarity you do not get alignment and ultimately you cannot get full engagement from your employees. So what you will see in this presentation or in this video is actually a presentation you also find on our website. So without further ado, let's dive into the presentation. Take care. Now, this is a video about getting the process right from aspiration to coherent action. It's a guide for leadership teams. What makes a good strategy? Good strategy has 4 elements: aspiration, diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent action. So the strategy process is actually a process getting from aspiration to coherent action. Now, the last 3, diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent action, is what Richard Rummelt calls the kernel of strategy. And we wrote a series of articles which you can find on the Agility 3 blog about this strategic kernel. But in reality what we see is a lot of bad strategy. Now, what are 4 characteristics of bad strategy? It is fluff, it is a lack of reference to challenges, confusing goals with strategy, and wrong strategic goals. And we're going to look at each of these in turn. So fluff, an example of fluff. Fluff is a superficial reformulation of the obvious. Now let's take an example of fluff from the strategy of Credit Suisse, who on their website present their strategy as: our strategy is to be a leading asset manager with strong investment banking capabilities. Now, if you take out the jargon, what this means is our basic strategy is to be a bank. So this is fluff. Next, lack of reference to challenges. Here, this would typically sound like this: the overall strategy is to increase a company's market share in each market, reduce cost in each business, and thereby increase sales and profits. Well, okay, so the strategy formulation does not mention any challenges that need to be overcome to achieve these wonderful goals. So a strategy is a response to challenges or an approach to overcoming obstacles. That's what a strategy is all about. If the challenges are not defined, it is impossible to assess the quality of the strategy. Okay, next. Confusing goals with strategy. This is a very common one. People think that once they've formulated goals, they have a strategy. Nonsense, they just have goals. Let's look at this. Our strategy is simple and clear. We call it the 2020 plan. Increase sales by 20% while achieving 20% profit margin. Great. This is what? These are goals or just wishes. Okay, this is a wish list. This is something that you wish would happen. This is not a strategy. If you ask on what basis, now this example here of this called strategy, where does it come from? It's a projection of sales, costs, margin, and profit. Okay, but no supporting substance in the form of challenges, opportunities, threats, strengths on which this projection is built. So, confusing goals with strategy. Next, wrong goal, wrong strategic goals. Now, 2 examples of wrong strategic goals are dog dinners objectives. Now, this is a long, scrambled, messy list of unrelated targets and things to do. Very often you have this, like, we have 20 priorities and we have 150 objectives and we have whatever. You know, just a long list, a laundry list of objectives. And the second is blue sky targets. Well, there's nothing wrong with blue sky targets, but they in themselves are not a strategy. They're just an aspiration, and we come to aspiration later on. These goals are long-term vision, but if you lack a bridge on how to achieve them, well, you don't have a strategy. Okay, now 4 elements of good strategy, we talked about them. aspiration, diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent action. And the sharp end of strategy is the coherent action. Okay, and the last three are the kernel. So let's look at aspiration. Aspiration is the answer to 6 strategic questions, which are core values, our big, audacious, noble goal. I prefer that to the BHAG from Collins. So I prefer this one. But it's a noble goal. It's something which in the future is an aspirational goal. What's a brand promise? So this is really what you promise to the people you serve, what you stand for. Then what's your target market? Who are you serving? And you can change the order of the target market and the brand promise. Doesn't matter. It's important that you know who you're serving. And then what's your core competency? What you can do well? What you want to build on to be able to sell, to serve that target market and deliver that brand promise. And then you have a 3-year picture. So that in a sense is your aspiration. It starts with your core values and it ends with a 3-year picture. Next, we come to the kernel of good strategy. Now, diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent action. Kernel, according to Richard Rummelt, of good strategy, and this is something we really like. So that's why we put so much emphasis on it. So, diagnosis. What's the diagnosis? Diagnosis describes and evaluates the current reality, links facts to patterns, and suggests paying more attention to some issues or problems and less to others. So it allows you to see where to focus. The diagnosis should also help replace the overwhelming complexity of reality with a simpler story that draws attention to its crucial aspects. So it's a way to tell a story of the challenges we're facing. And the goal of the diagnosis is achieved when the initial situation can be presented as a handful of challenges. So if you see that in your discussions with the leadership team, you have like 4 or 5 challenges max. I prefer to have 3, but let's say you have 4 to 5 challenges, a handful of challenges. These are the challenges we need to face. These are the challenges we need to solve. These are the obstacles we need to overcome. Then you have a good diagnosis. Now, the challenges can be internal or external. Now, examples of external challenges are market position. What is your position in the market? Changes in consumer behavior, innovation happening around you, and new business models happening around you, market disruptions of any kind. So these are typical external challenges, things that are happening around you that will lead to something, you need to do something about it, part of your diagnosis. More often than not, at least for the clients I'm working with, because I'm generally working with clients that are very good commercially, they are facing internal challenge, or many of them, which are outdated routines, unnecessary complexity, poor performing or outdated IT systems, bureaucracy. Not so much with my clients. You tend to have bureaucracy more with bigger clients. Skill gaps, so technical skill gaps, management skill gaps, then you have also the lack of cooperation between business units, so silos. It's surprising how small a company can be to have silos. And then plain old bad management, so just poor management. So these are examples of internal challenges which need to be addressed or can be addressed in the diagnosis. So next, guiding policy. What's the guiding policy? The guiding policy specifies how the situation identified in the diagnosis can be managed. Okay? It describes how the 3-year picture, which we described in the aspiration, can be achieved, taking into consideration the challenges identified in the diagnosis. So you see how these things fit together? A guiding policy can be described in the form of strategic thrusts with corresponding 1-year goals. Okay? Strategic goals, strategic thrusts. So this is a 3-year type of picture, and then corresponding 1-year goals. And if these fit, you have something that looks like a guiding policy. Finally, coherent action, the sharp end of strategy, as we say. Coherent action is the third and maybe the most important element of good strategy. It is, as we already said, the sharp end of strategy. This is where it really cuts. Unfortunately, many leadership teams, when they engage in a strategy process, call the objectives the strategy and then stop there. This is a huge mistake, as the kernel of good strategy must contain action. Without action, your strategy is just, well, whatever, but not a strategy, at least not a good one. It's a bad strategy, okay? A strategy without action is like a knife that is not sharpened. It looks like something useful, but it is not. Okay? A powerful way to coordinate action is to formulate proximate objectives so near-term objectives, in the form of quarterly objectives and key results. So these translate the goals of the yearly goals from your guiding policy into specific quarterly objectives and then key results. So that's when it gets really, really interesting. So how do you get from aspiration to coherent action? Well, we typically do this in 3 workshops with the leadership team. Workshop 1, where we look at the aspiration, core values, big audacious noble goal, brand promise, target market, core competency, and 3-year picture. This is generally enough for a first workshop. Now, in the next workshop, we look into diagnosis and guiding policy. So you look at the challenges, the strategic thrusts, the 1-year goals, and we do a strategy consistency check, so to see if this works together. So that's the result of the second workshop. And in the third workshop, we look at coherent action, where we look at the objectives for the next quarter based on the 1-year goals, and then discuss key results for each quarterly objective. So that's essentially it. We get from strategy to coherent action in 3 workshops. For smaller clients, we manage to do this in workshops which are about 3 hours each workshop, sometimes 4, depending on how much. So 3 to 4 hours for each of these workshops, preceded maybe by some interviews. But this is essentially the process we do with our clients. Now, we use 3 tools in the strategy process. One is the strategy execution planner. And the second is a strategy gap analysis. We also call it SWOT++, but because it builds on the SWOT but goes much further than the SWOT. And finally, we have the super simple quarterly planner, which is really the one which you use to formulate the quarterly goals. So there you have it. This is really about how to get the strategy process right. And to download the tools mentioned in this video, you can go to www.agility3.com strategy tools. I hope you enjoyed this video and happy strategizing. Take care.